Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, once more to Indaba, Africa, the home of civil discourse and cogent conversation. Hi, I'm Chris, I'm your host. Today, I'm going to talk about comments made by African Union Chair and South African President Cyril Ramaphosa on the occasion of Africa Day just a few days ago on the 25th of May, 2020, in which he called for the lifting of sanctions against Sudan and Zimbabwe yet again. This is not the first time that Cyril Ramaphosa has made such a call since he has been president of South Africa, and certainly not the first time he's made it, even since he's been the acting chair of the African Union. He's called for the unconditional lifting of sanctions on Sudan and Zimbabwe. And this is what he had to say. As we deal with the impact of this novel coronavirus pandemic, we repeat our call for the unconditional lifting of sanctions that have been imposed on Zimbabwe and Sudan. It was part of his televised address marking Africa Day on the 25th. Now, the reason the U.S. has imposed sanctions on these two countries, for Sudan, it's because it's a state sponsor of terrorism, and that has not been lifted, that designation. And Zimbabwe, this is a consequence of gross human rights abuses and the theft of elections or irregular elections taking place in Zimbabwe over the past 2 decades. However, the journalist that covered this story, Hassan Isolo, made the following statement. And this is the reason I make this video, because I'm getting, quite frankly, tired of this nonsense and this false attribution of these so-called sanctions and the dictates coming from leaders in Africa telling us that we must lift these sanctions or these restrictions to help other countries. And I think that someone on the staff of President Ramaphosa needs to bring him up to date with the facts and reality, because clearly he's not keeping up with current events. Neither is this journalist. So as a result of the sanctions, the two African countries cannot access much needed aid to fight COVID-19 or purchase medical supplies. That's simply untrue, and I'll talk about in just a moment. President Ramaphosa also called on, he echoed the sentiments of African finance ministers who since March have been saying this, calling for multilateral institutions to help with debt relief for Africa and assist in other ways. Well, there's a couple problems with this. Number one, in March, the International Monetary Fund forgave the debt of 19 African countries, not all of their debt, but portions of their debt, in order to save them money in debt relief payments, paying back the principal and interest right now. That took place in March. And since then, the World Bank has granted $3.4 billion loan to Nigeria, another $1 billion loan to Ghana, which also got $873 million in funding from the IMF. And Kenya, in addition, has gotten $1 billion loan. There have been other loans, but these are some of the top ones I highlight. All has happened since March, the beginning of the crisis and the lockdowns taking place in much of Africa. So the staff who prepares President Ramaphosa, either at the African Union Commission or his own South African staff, is doing a very poor job in updating the poor president as to what's actually happening in the world. Now, if he wants to call for more debt relief and saying this is insufficient, that's one thing. But simply calling for debt relief and deceiving the public as if the world and multilateral institutions have done nothing for Africa is shameful, and it must stop. The media is not reporting this. The mainstream media doesn't care. And so I am bringing this to folks' attention. It's simply untrue. You need only follow the facts and keep up with these multilateral institutions, their public press releases, and the news, and you'll know what is actually happening here. Now, is it enough to help African countries? One can make the argument that it is woefully inadequate. For example, in the case of Nigeria, Nigeria will lose at least $30 billion this year in revenue from petroleum. That's a double whammy from rapidly falling oil prices and demonstrably lower demand around the globe for oil has meant that the Nigerians have few places to shop their oil, and they're not making money off of it. So it will cost at least $30 billion this year. The $3.4 billion loan from the World Bank is barely going to make a dent in that shortfall, and Nigeria will find itself in desperate financial straits as the year passes. So the argument can be made that it's insufficient and more is needed, but that is not even the argument that Ramaphosa is making and repeatedly making. Now, back to the sanctions. The sanctions that he's talking about, once again, his staff needs to do a better job informing. President Ramaphosa is clearly behind the 8 ball once again. He made these comments on Africa Day, May 25th, completely ignoring, not mentioning for just even a moment that on the 21st of May, just a few short days before this, the U.S. Treasury Department lifted its restrictions on 2 Zimbabwean entities. That would be the Infrastructure Development Bank of Zimbabwe and the Agricultural Development Bank of Zimbabwe. Both were given a clean bill of health and removed from the list of state institutions that were complicit in past bad practices. Now, those are 2 very important banks, and will give them access to credit, far greater access, also making payments and transfers far simpler for them. And this should be very good news for Zimbabwe at least for the government of Zimbabwe, which has been hampered by these sanctions. So, as I've called them, past not sanctions, but restrictions, because most of the actual restrictions are travel restrictions on senior ZANU-PF. But there are at least, now about 17 state institutions in which government officials pilfer that were also placed on the list. These two have been removed from it now, but President Ramaphosa apparently is completely oblivious to this fact and also failed to mention that. So two things here. One, the debt relief that's already taken place by the IMF and World Bank, the money lended by the IMF and World Bank since then, since March. Apparently, President Ramaphosa, in his role as the African Union chair, is completely oblivious to this, as in his role as the president of South Africa, he seems completely unaware that this has happened, or he's simply dishonest and doesn't care to tell people the truth. One would hope it's the former and not the latter, but who knows? We'll have to listen for President Ramaphosa to tell us what the real situation is. And the other situation, of course, here is that he's behind the times, calling for sanctions to be lifted against Zimbabwe, and an effort's already been made. Now, the government of Zimbabwe claims that this is not sufficient, and I really don't care about their claims, because that government is full of criminals and human rights abusers, and they've harmed the people of Zimbabwe immeasurably. And the reason that these measures are in place is because of their criminal activities. And so these are measures the U.S. government and European governments have taken. The U.S. government is a sovereign state, and if it doesn't want to trade or bank with Zimbabwe officials or not allow them to travel to this country, it is the prerogative of Washington to do that. If the ZANU-PF government of Zimbabwe doesn't like that, they have all the opportunity to change their behavior and come back into the community of nations. But President Ramaphosa is unaware of what needs to be done, apparently. That's two things that I find quite disturbing, that he is unaware of this even taking place. And finally, I should mention that when he's calling for relief and help for Africa, debt relief is one thing, but let's keep in mind that debt relief only removes the principal payment plus interest made on a repetitive basis. So say you give someone $4 billion of debt relief, unless you wiped out the debt, you're not helping them. And even if you do wipe out the debt with debt relief, you're only helping them a small amount in the near term, because it's not as if you're giving a country $4 billion by going debt relief. You're forgiving a debt that would have been paid back over many years. Now they don't have to make the payments. It will help them in the long term, but the short term, in the COVID-19 crisis, the Wuhan coronavirus pandemic, you need to do something else. And that's coming in the form of loans to the World Bank, IMF. Also, what's neglected here by President Ramaphosa, once again, is that the United States has given immediate emergency cash injection of funds to over 30 African countries, and the amount of $254 million in sub-Saharan Africa and $23 million in North Africa. So this isn't even mentioned, nearly $300 million in cash, emergency cash. And that includes $23 million for Sudan, making it the fourth largest amount in Africa behind Nigeria, Ethiopia, and Kenya is the other, I believe, but they're fourth highest, the DRC. So behind Nigeria, the DRC, and Ethiopia, Sudan, who we barely have a diplomatic relationship with, received the fourth highest amount of money. So Ramaphosa's staff is failing him, or he's dishonest and lying to the world about the fact that there has been debt relief, there has been multilateral assistance from multilateral organizations, and the world's largest donor, the United States, has also kicked in a significant amount of money to help the people of both Sudan and Zimbabwe. And on top of that, the United States Treasury Department has recently lifted 2 institutions owned by the state from its sanctions list. None of this, of course, was mentioned. Once again, we hear simply this blather nonsense coming from the African Union chair, in this case, Cyril Ramaphosa. And of course, if we ever want to take him remotely seriously, we simply need to listen to the final comments made in his Africa Day presentation, in which he injected African Union into politics of yet another region that has nothing to do with Africa. When Ramaphosa added that as Africans, that they would continue to stand on the side of justice. Seems quite odd when law-abiding citizens are being arrested and criminalized in South Africa each and every day under the draconian lockdown. So justice, I really don't understand what your definition of justice is there, President Ramaphosa. And he called for the end of oppression of the Palestinian people and occupation of their homeland. I'm not even going to get into that discussion. I'm not really sure what that has to do with Africa. But once again, President Ramaphosa, your staff is woefully inadequate. If you need some help with that, you need some consulting, I can make myself available to help your staff out and fully inform them about what's actually happening in the world, since they seem quite uninformed. Yes, a bit cheeky of me, folks, but having a little fun with that. If you've enjoyed this video or found it in the least thought-provoking, please feel free to subscribe to my channel by smashing that subscription button right down there. Be sure to push the bell icon to get notified of future videos and my live streams. And also, if you want to leave comments, you're welcome to leave comments, positive, negative. You can agree or disagree. I'll address them as many as possible. And I ask that you smash that like button because it drives viewership. This has been an Indaba Africa production. Thank you for tuning in, and we'll catch you next time.